Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen, sometimes called Greencastle Block. And before we go into this position, I have gotten a rash of friend requests, like 7 or 8 on YouTube over the past 2 days. And I certainly thank you for subscribing to my videos, and thank you for the gesture, of a friend request. But I just want to go on the record and say that I reject all of them. Not because I don't like you, but I don't understand the point of friend requests on YouTube. I mean, if you like my videos, then you'll subscribe to my videos, and if I like your videos, I'll subscribe to your videos. So I don't see why we have to have a separate system to keep track of who is whose friend, like this is some type of a social networking site. So yeah, I mean, thank you. If you like my videos, just subscribe. And with that out of the way, I will talk about this position now. I'm sort of presenting this as a tactical puzzle. This came from a closed Sicilian, and white has some kingside space. He's rolling forward with his pawns, and he has more pieces developed. He has 4 pieces developed into the center, whereas black has 2 pieces. But black, on the other hand, he doesn't have any serious weaknesses in his game. And his knights, which are his only developed pieces, are on their best squares. The knight on c6 is almost always black's best placed piece in a Sicilian defense. And its companion knight is on e5, which is a very effective square when white cannot drive it away with a pawn. You'll see that white advanced his pawn f4 to f5, and this action produced a great square on e5 for black's knight to sit. Usually it's very advantageous if white somehow tricks black into putting a pawn on e5 before he advances this f5 push. So black has great knights on c6 and e5, and they complement each other very well, as you're about to see in this example. Now, the last move for black was knight f to e5, and the threat is to take on g4. Now, white, he'll play pawn to g5, which looks like a natural move. It removes the pawn from en-prise, and it continues the kingside pawn storm to open up areas around the black king. But this move g5, it's not the best, and it's actually a blunder in this position. And I'm going to ask you to find the correct line of play for black here. Now, if you're familiar with closed Sicilian positions, the first move will be very easy for you to find. But you have to really look and see what are all the legal options for white after that move, and what is the correct strategy, tactical way for black to play to take advantage of white's weakness. And what is white's weakness in this position? Maybe he's got this knight that's only defended by the queen. Maybe he's got this pawn on c2. That should be a big hint. A pawn on c2, if it fell to a knight, would fork all 3 of the white major pieces. And also this king is sitting in the center. So yeah, if you consider all those things, then you should be able to come up with the move knight to d4. But knight to d4, it looks great because now these knights are working together very well. They're converging on f3, threatening to just win a piece by playing knight takes knight. And also the knight takes c2 is a threat. Now it does require a bit of calculation, since apparently white can just win a pawn here with knight takes knight. Well, if knight takes d4, which is the obvious response, then after pawn takes, the pawn then forks 2 of the white pieces, the queen on e3 and the knight on c3. And if the pawn is taken, queen takes d4, well, now we have knight to f3. See, black will get a knight fork, but it's the other knight that delivers the fork that picks up the white queen. So, in this position, the pawn is poisoned. So the best idea is for white to play queen e2 to get some counterplay. After pawn takes knight, queen h5 check, black just slides his king over to f8. And black is up a piece. His knight on e5 is still very powerful and cannot be challenged because of the hanging bishop on c4. And he's threatening to play queen e8 to challenge the white queen for control over the king side and sort of consolidate the black position. And this is not enough compensation by far for a piece because the knight on e5 is so excellent. So yeah, knight takes knight just loses a piece. So what are the other options for white here? Well, none of them are very good. In fact, everything involves losing a piece. Knight takes e5 is terrible because of knight takes c2 and the aforementioned royal fork. So white could castle either way, castles, and knight takes on f3, and rook takes. And here, I think that black needs to be careful, because the natural move, if you just saw rook takes knight, and maybe knight takes rook check and queen takes, then white actually has a fair bit of compensation for the exchange here. He has an iron grip on the light squares due to his knight on c3 and bishop on c4, and the threat of queen to h5 check before black can organize a good defense for his king. Ideally in these situations, with the king side so weakened, black would want to castle queen side, but there's just not enough time for this. So this some compensation for the exchange here. Maybe black is still better, I don't know. But it's very clear that black is better after knight takes c2, because this fork is about to pick up the rook on a1, and this rook on f3 blocks the white queen from coming to the light squares. So white is not going to have the threat of queen to h5 check. Black will have some time to develop his pieces and organize a good defense. So also this knight takes c2 happens to win another pawn. So yes, castle's kingside not too good, although it is poison if black just decides to grab the immediate rook on f3. Castle's queenside is probably the best, but after knight takes, black is threatening to start a major attack on the queenside with pawn to b5. So this is no good either. So instead of g5, which is a blunder, the best line of play is probably knight takes knight. Then after knight takes, black still has a great knight on e5, but he doesn't have the excellent Sicilian c6 knight anymore. How much time do I have left? Oh, plenty of time. So after g5 here, black should castle, and say white castles to connect his rooks, and now king h8 to get off of the diagonal for the, I have some extra comments here, for the bishop. He wants to get off of this bishop diagonal, which is why king h8 was played. So here, the knight on e5 is really an excellent piece. It helps out defensively and also offensively. It stops white's e-pawn from rolling forward, and also puts some pressure on the bishop and possibly something on d3. And it's hard to remove this knight from e5, because in order to remove the knight from e5, you can't challenge it with a knight, because these knights are 2 squares diagonally apart. So it'll take white's knight at least 4 moves to challenge this black knight. And the pawn going to d4 doesn't help, because black would just capture, and then no pawn can ever come to d4. So you would need to prepare it with pawn to c3 and then pawn to d4 to remove the knight on e5. But if this knight ever moves away from c3 to allow the pawn to come to c3, then black can just answer with pawn to d5, because that knight was preventing black from making this counterstroke in the center. So if pawn to d5 and pawn to d4, preventing mechanically white from putting the pawn on d4, then black would have this dominating knight on e5, and he also has the ability to play for a queenside pawn storm, because the pawn on a4 has compromised the white's king safety over there. So So yeah, that's what's going on in this position, although I do think that white has a big head start on the king side. So I'm not going to say black is better here. It's very exciting unbalanced play. So that is that is this tactical position that I came up with that comes from a closed Sicilian. And it is a double knight fork because the answer involves two knights operating in great harmony from d4 and e5. Well, thank you for watching this video. Keep subscribing. I'm going to play in a small tournament, a 3-round game 60 over the weekend. Gonna try and keep getting some more experience and hopefully getting some more points. Well, see you next time.